Hey, everybody, welcome, welcome. I am Emily Moyer, and I don't even know what show this is. This is just going to be my sort of year-end wrap-up here with my good friend, Masaki Miyagawa. And I kind of, I'm not sure if you were the first guest I talked to this year, but you were definitely one of the first guests I talked to, and I decided you'd be the appropriate one to sort of end the year with. So welcome back, Masaki. How you doing?
Hey, Emily, doing good. And wow, what a year, huh? We talked about it maybe at the end of last year, but I was saying this was going to be pretty big, and I think it exceeded all our expectations.
All right, so we're gonna wrap up 2020 here. What we're gonna do is it's gonna be a full two-hour show. We are going to kind of do a hindsight look at 2020 here in the first hour, and then forecasting to 2021 in the second hour. But before we do any of that, Masaki has been the international traveler. He's just returned from a few weeks in Brazil, and I kind of like to hear about A, what his trip was like, but B, just like observations on what this fucking mess looks like in a different country. So fill us in, Masaki. I don't know too many people who've done international travel during this time. We've done a lot of domestic travel, but you got to go.
I had a lot of miles.
Yeah.
And they're starting to, I think the airlines are going to go bankrupt and they'll get bailed out, and then they'll have to have this COVID pass, right? But I just wanted to use my miles while I could, and there's not that many places you can go as quote unquote normal, right? No test, no whatever.
Yeah.
I have a strong connection to Brazil. I've been there over 20 times in the past 14 years. So I don't even know how many times, but I think each person has kind of a power spot, or you have a place that you connect to particularly. For example, I loved, Emily and we were down in Central Texas a couple months ago with Robert Phoenix. Great trip. Had never been to Central Texas before, or Austin, and I liked it. But I feel like I could do okay there. I would like to go visit again, but it's not particularly a power spot for me. But let me tell you, Brazil, there's something about Brazil for me. And so I went down there and I was there for about 2 weeks, and I had some mystical things happen. So, yeah. But Brazil, well, I just did a short article on my Patreon, which is Patreon / pyramid power. And I was talking about how one of the key steps, if you're interested to increase the depth of your understanding of this world, this matrix we're living in, is the esoteric or metaphysical signs and symbols, right? The archetypes. So everything kind of falls into different categories. And it's just kind of a loose way to recognize, just like the seasons, right? We know if it's winter, it's going to be cold, so you can wear a winter jacket, right? So if you understand the signs and symbols, it's like you're more in the flow, right? Because a lot of people, they're running on pure autopilot, totally unaware of who they are in themselves, and totally unaware of the environment they're living in, right? Except maybe whatever the mainstream media is telling them. But I would say one of the very simple associations you can make with different countries, but in general, is this concept of, say, the sacred masculine and sacred feminine. Or you could say in the Chinese system, right, they have the circle with the dark and the light half. It's the yin and the yang, right? So I was saying that, well, we live in the America, US, right? So I would say US or North America, England or United Kingdom, and Europe is basically yang culture, or it's male dominant, or you could say it's masculine energy, which is, so you can make these associations, right? There's the sun, and then there's the moon. There's the light and the dark. There's the hot and the cold. There's the logic, and then there's the intuition. So in this way, the West, you can even see in history, they were in the Western Europe particularly, they were the colonizers and imperialists, right? because they were able to dominate the rest of the world. But these other countries, they just did not have the impulse to defend or maintain their sovereignty, right? To maintain themselves as their own countries.
Yep.
So Brazil definitely is it's a yin culture, or it's a sacred feminine. So what does that mean, right? And let me tell you, Emily, it is kind of disorienting because one, the culture difference is just so different, the environment's different, but it's like, and it's a long trip too. It's so it takes you're basically going from here from LA all the way down to almost the backside of the planet like that, right? So it's like I literally went through a portal because it's so different, right? But I would say one of the main differences is there is a stereotype or this idea, or even among people that are into the ayahuasca and that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Well, why can't you just, stay in your Western city? And some people do take ayahuasca, but it's a special thing when they go all the way down there, right?
Yeah.
Why? Because the cultures, I would say, in Latin America, Africa, and Asia in general, they're more on the sacred feminine side. So if you go to a place, and what does that mean? You're going to the subconscious, right? The unseen, what's just below the surface, the intuition, which is what people are looking for in that kind of psychedelic experience, right?
Yeah.
So, but for me, I'm American, but I come from Japanese cultural background, right? So very, very kind of closed, and Asians in general, it's kind of looked down upon actually to express too much.
Yeah.
I think that's a Confucian influence, because the Confucians, they thought of expressing your emotions openly like that is kind of like an animal. So it was more civil to kind of like keep up appearance. Now, if you go home, you can show, or typical thing with Asians too. If you get drunk, then you could pass it off as like, well, that was just drunk, so I let it out a little bit, But if you think about that, and then also, like, a lot of us have had odd experiences when we were younger, kind of makes you a little bit closed, reserved, right? So what's the place that's totally opposite from that kind of more closed cultural background? It's Brazil. There is nothing subtle about, like, how Japanese, they go like, yeah. Brazilians, whoa, right? Everything's big. It's kind of like Texas. Everything's big in Brazil, right? The people are hugging. They're very expressive. So I think that's one reason I was meant to go there. But then also I spent a lot, people probably ask you, but they ask me, how do you come to these conclusions, or how did you even think about these things? Well, let me tell you, Emily, I spent a lot of years in Brazil walking around with my broken Portuguese. So I really couldn't, I was like a reverse immigrant, right?
Yeah.
Because I did live there for a while too. I couldn't really speak that well. And so I was kind of like the alien. I'm like undercover, and everybody there's a lot of Japanese in Sao Paulo where I go.
Mm-hmm.
Like 1 million, it's the biggest Japanese colony outside Japan is actually in Brazil.
That's pretty common in South America, that the various countries, like some of them have a large Chinese population, some of them have a large Japanese. You even see this in like the cuisine. You see like
Peru.
Peru has Asian influence, and Brazil and even Argentina. Like I think there's a place in Ventura that has a combination of Argentinian and Asian food. Yeah.
There's a lot of Chinese in Nicaragua, I heard. But in any case, so I was kind of undercover, but also, I do have a background in music. I DJ'd for many years.
Yeah.
So I would be DJing at night, but most of my friends are normal people, so they're working in the day. So 99% of the day, I'm actually just walking the streets of Sao Paulo alone.
Yeah.
So, but this kind of silence does have a benefit, because I think a lot of us, we spend a lot of years doing so-called internal work, right? So on the surface, it may look like, and maybe to ourselves, we're like, God, I should be doing something, but a lot of us were walking on like, what do you call, like broken eggshells. We're like kind of like traumatized. We've got to work on our own stuff, but at the same time, we're thinking, I should be doing more, because I look at the people I grew up with, or my social circle, and I'm kind of like stuck,
Mhm.
right? But guess what? The benefit was we were actually, like physically working out.
Yeah.
This kind of sphere of the psychic, the intuitive, the deeper reflection, the metaphysics, it's like a muscle. And the more you focus on it, the stronger it gets. So guess what? A lot of us, we're pretty strong because we got our ass kicked for years.
Yeah.
And then now people ask, well, how did you come to this place? Well, it's because a lot of us were in our heads for years, decade or more, right? So that was what happened to me in Brazil, just shuffling around the streets. And Sao Paulo, a lot of people don't know Sao Paulo because when they see photos of Brazil, it's usually Rio de Janeiro with the Cristo, the Christ on the hill, and the beaches. Sao Paulo has no beaches. It's hours inland from the coast, but what they do have is the biggest metropolitan city in South America. It's like, I think Greater Sao Paulo has like 17 million. So a lot of great restaurants, Emily. I ate good when I was there. And then
You gotta do it, Masaki, right? Like that's one natural sort of just connection and symbiosis and whatever that Masaki and I had immediately when we started to become friends, is that like we could appreciate each other's taste in cuisine and the priority that food takes in our lives.
So Brazil, we're saying Brazil is sacred feminine. It's yin culture, right? So and this is a generality. It's not to say everyone this way, but it's a trend. Okay. So one thing about Brazil and many countries in Latin America, the thinking of the people is different. Now, they could be scientific, but let me tell you, even people that work in IT, who I know very well, people that work in technical and scientific so-called positions, there's kind of like no contradiction between that scientific thinking. And then they'll say, I've literally heard this, like, oh, my ex-girlfriend, she put the hex on me and I got to go to the shaman to take it off. I mean, this is just regular everyday talk because it's in the culture. Or they say, oh, my auntie, my uncle, she does the hands-on healing and this kind of stuff is very common.
Yeah.
Which is different. Now, not to say it doesn't exist here in the...
But here it's called woo-woo. And there it's...
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, and so I would say this. I think there's probably something about the location and the culture, but the very thinking of the people. So we're talking about thought form, the intention, right? If the people are more open to certain things, that charges the space and it allows more things to come through, right? Yeah. Because if you're close to it, it's not going to come in as much. If the people are totally open to it, that kind of a space between the dimensions, Emily, in Brazil is very thin.
Yeah.
Very thin. And, I think I mentioned some of these things before, but was in a dub reggae party, right? We're talking dub reggae. So it's like 70s reggae, but on a sound system.
Yeah.
I was on no drugs. I had maybe a couple beers and maybe one puff off of a spliff, which was basically like tobacco.
Yeah.
Because it was Brazil, right? I saw these geometric patterns. Now, they weren't very strong, but I was perceiving them. It was kind of like in my mind. It was a little bit like I could see it, but it was kind of in my mind's eye too. And they were just coming out of the speakers. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? Because I'm not really on anything. So there was something about that night. And then, one of my friends who I stayed with her this past time. Her family, her grandmother started a spiritual house.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a thing called Kardecismo. It's like Allan Kardec. And it's like basically, you remember like Houdini, the seances and the spiritualism? Yeah. Very much connected. It was popular all around the world. But now it kind of died out, but it perfectly fits Brazil, right? So her grandmother had started a church. It's not a Christian church, but it's like a spiritual center. And I hung out there many years, and you would see, because there was a public area and then the family lived in the back, but I would go to the restroom that the public uses a lot, and I would pass like there you could see the light inside, and the light would be different when they were doing a session. So I don't know, it's red or green, and you'd hear people talking in tongues, and I'm like, oh, okay, this this is different. And the spirits are everywhere. And I would say Brazil, that layer of Christianity, because a lot of people are like, oh, Latin people, Christian, Catholic, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
That layer of Christianity is very thin, Emily, because you scratch it, it's all voodoo. You got the Brazilian Indian voodoo, their traditions, mixed with the Catholic Romanism of their whole saints and all that, right?
Yeah.
With the African Yoruba, right? In Santeria, for the Spanish speaking, but in Brazil, the Portuguese speaking, they call Umbanda or Candomblé. And that Yoruba stuff is mixed with the Catholic saints, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you got the Jewish Kabbalah. There's just a lot of Jews in Latin America.
Mm-hmm.
And there, you have Arabs and Japanese, so whatever we added to the pot, and it's all mixed together, and it's a hotbed of occultism, mysticism, and all that, and you have the light and the dark down there. But this was kind of like I feel like I recharge every time I go to Brazil.
Yeah.
But I would tell you, the kind of experience you had, I think people in Latin America might be a lot more open to it at a gut level than a person here if you told the more far out stuff you've been through.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but it's like, now also logically they may not have a deep basis of research, but this is the thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yin and the yang, the sacred masculine, the logic, and the sacred feminine, the intuition.
Yeah.
At a gut level, they understand what you're talking about energetically or spiritually that way, right?
Yeah.
So it was kind of a space where I could go and just kind of maybe relax a little bit. And those kind of energies also, they could be very healing, because I would say this, yang cultures, the Aries dominant cultures, they're very judgmental.
Yeah.
The yin culture, it's just kind of like it's like kind of water energy, right? It's just kind of like we're all kind of together.
Well, it's kind of interesting because the view I think that most American people have of Brazil, we have a couple of views, right? Obviously, we think of like the Rio and what's the name of the big parade that they do, the big festival.
Which one, Emily? Because
the one what's the very famous one?
The Carnival.
Carnival, right?
But I was joking because I said, which parade, Emily? Because the biggest gay parade in the world,
right?
Parada Gay in Sao Paulo.
Right. So those are the things we think of. Like we see that on TV. That's when we'll see, Brazil had its big celebration, right? Kind of thing, right? So like we see that, and then like, so okay, it seems like a very festive culture, but then on the flip side of that, we hear all these reports about how Bolsinaro is a strongman dictator. He's the South American version of Donald Trump, and blah blah blah. So like you have this like this one idea that it's like this very festive partying culture, and then this other idea that it's like a right-wing dictatorship, right, kind of thing. And what you're describing is not at all the picture that is portrayed to us. So
well, I would say this. One connection is that Brazil is a Virgo country, which is Virgo is a service sign. It's actually more of a feminine energy. And there are actually, to my recollection, there's many countries in Latin or South America that are Virgo countries.
Yeah.
And so what does that mean? That they're kind of more like order followers.
Yeah.
And they like strong men. Is this like in Russia? They like Putin. They actually think he's too soft. But in Latin America, there is this trend towards, well, it's Papa, the Pope, the church, right? So you follow what Papa says, right? Or Bolsinaro, who he's arguably many times worse than Trump. I mean, Trump is pretty lightweight compared to some of the things that Bolsonaro, because Latin America has a tradition of military dictatorships. You're talking about death squads to kill poor kids, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, in Latin America, it's a kind of a Cuba style communism. So it's like hard left, but then the other side is hard right. There's really
no middle. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's that, but I would say that, and then, other things, the crystals I use in my pyramids, like Emily's favorite pyramid here.
I love
right?
that one because it's got this that oceanic vibe to it.
Yeah, got the cowrie shells here. The crystals I use are Brazilian quartz. So
Yeah,
there we go again, right? Well,
yeah.
these mystical materials, but
I know.
yeah, I
I
mean,
loved your picture from the crystal shop in Brazil. I was like, oh,
oh
there's
yeah.
stuff in there. Yeah,
If you're interested in, well, this is the thing too, right? There's your typical tourist spots like the Cristo on the hill in Rio de Janeiro, right? The Statue of Christ. A lot of people want to go there. There's Iguazu Falls, which I've never been to. I'm going to the city. It's like New York City, Latin style, Brazil style, right? Sao
yeah,
Paulo, 17 million people. Uh, I went to a crystal shop this last trip, and it was 2 floors just packed with crystals from the size of the palm of your hand to a full person, right? And the energy in there was incredible. So if people are interested, I made a post about that, or you can contact me. It's
yeah.
LP Minerais do Brasil or something like that. But they have a lot of awesome crystal shops in Brazil. But also, I was saying, connected to that, people often think you have to go to the Amazon, to these, barely contacted tribes to get
Right.
the real experience. Let me tell you, I've been to Sao Paulo many times, and I've had the oddest experiences
Yeah.
in Sao Paulo, because guess what? There is something to the idea of what do they call it? The this idea that the Indians or these people, they're sort of like, oh, noble savage, right? That's what they
Right.
call it. We have to go to these like primitive noble savages to get the real. That's a little I don't know what you call it, racist or something.
Yeah.
Guess what? We're in the city. Emily and I are city people, right? You
Yeah.
don't think there's people in Sao Paulo in the city that they're doing normal everyday job. They may even be working like tech jobs, right? But
Yep.
they are highly unusual on the spiritual tip.
I'll tell you this, like,
Uh,
all of these things, like some people, like you said, are city people. Some people are more
yeah,
nature people, woods people, mountain people, desert people.
yeah.
For my own self, because I'm a city person, the craziest experiences that I have ever had are always right down like downtown LA or East LA,
Oh,
where I've seen like the craziest shit ever. And it's for
uh,
people that, right. And so, and people who tend to be from or more drawn to like the more natural environments, that's where they have it, because that's where
uh-huh.
like their vibration or their comfort level is to sort of open up and see that. And for me, it's always the city. So you're absolutely right. Like,
Well, Emily, I've never mentioned this on a show, but I talked to you about it in Austin. Do you remember we it was after the Hill Country conference with Robert Phoenix, and
right.
then we spent a couple of days in Austin, and it was you, me, Thor by the Door, Steve Mercer, and
Mhm.
Laura,
Yeah.
and we were almost at the Airbnb, but we crossed this intersection, and to me, I didn't say anything at the time, but it's like everything went. It was just like a drop off. Everything got very still and quiet, and
Yeah.
it's like we're like players on a game board. Like
Totally.
everything just went dead. And then as soon as we finished crossing the street, it was like normal again. And
Yeah.
then when we got back, I said, Emily, did you notice something odd? And you were like, oh yeah, happens all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I have those moments in this.
Uh-huh.
It happens to me in lots of places
Uh-huh.
that I go where, like, oh, for a second, it's okay, I see. Now we're on the Lego board. We're on the Lego land. And then now it's like, right. Like, and now we're back to something that feels more like what we think of as real, which is probably
Uh-huh.
just some larger version of the Lego, whatever. But yes, you can definitely, like all of those layers of like realities are available everywhere for you to tune in.
So I don't have as many, like I have that maybe once every 5 years, because it happened to me before.
Oh,
But it's almost like silence has a sound. Like
yes.
like people have been in the forest, and that kind of like it's difficult to describe, but like if you're in the forest and it's just like that hollow kind of like sound of nothing.
Yep.
That's what it felt. And it's almost like somebody forgot to flip the switch on the playing field.
Yep.
And like we walked into an area that wasn't completely finished or something, or they forgot to flip it on.
Yep.
And then we just passed through. But I don't know what that is, but it's not, because I'm one that I wouldn't say skeptical, but I'm like, we'll see.
So
that was very discernible. Like something was different, whatever we walked into for those few seconds.
So I just recorded a sort of patrons only Project Kids special kind of thing with Michael yesterday. We were talking about sort of something like this, that there are these areas where there seems to be like a rift or a seam in, where two realities have been grafted together, and that space, that little space where the sort of split is, tends to sometimes be where that happens, right? So,
well, I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of this. One, because we're more open to it, but another thing is, we just passed this Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, which whatever people think about exactly when, because some people say like, oh, 2012 is when we really crossed over and we're in the Aquarian age, right? But this Saturn-Pluto conjunction, that's like a major, like, woo, the flag is like, okay, guys, right? In 2020, we did that whole show in 2020. 2020, 2 and 2 is 4. That's what? That's Aquarius. 4 is Aquarius energy. So I think there's just many signs that this is the portal. Like Trump was the chaos master.
Yeah.
And Aquarius is a sign of chaos that his presidency kind of like sat over this period. Yeah. It seems like he's fading out just as like this gate has been open. We're passing through.
Yeah.
And so connected to what? The whole portal thing, the weird stuff. That's all Aquarius. So it's about to get, I think it's about to get very exciting for the people that are ready for it.
Yeah.
And we're going to see stuff that'll be eye-popping. So.
Yeah. Okay, before I just to sort of wrap up your Brazil thing, like just out of curiosity, like the craziness the whole world has been exposed to, both with like the COVID nonsense and this great reset, and then of course, like unfortunately the whole world is forced to suffer through our election woes here in the United States, right? What does that look like in Brazil or from Brazil? How are the people responding to all of this versus here,
Well, I think that another sign that we are very much in these Aquarian energies is Aquarius is the group. And no matter who you are, what you think, where you're coming from culturally and so forth, we're all of the one mind because we're all connected to this experience. And I think the whole world is polarized right now. And definitely, like you were saying, Bolsinaro, who is a right-wing kind of Zion nationalist figure in Brazil, similar to Trump. You think Trump is polarizing? Bolsonaro is like to another level. So he'll say things like, "Hey, don't be a fag. It's just it's just a cold."
Yeah.
And then he said stuff like, we should have killed like 60,000 leftists in the 60s. If we did that, we wouldn't have this problem today. That kind of stuff.
So, hold on, put a pin right there. Right. Yeah. Okay. So like, well, those statements are disturbing on one level.
He's not wrong about.
There's an undeniable truth about them, right?
This is the thing. I think is very interesting that I guess you could say the universe has a sense of humor, because this kind of polarization. Most people, Emily, they do not have the discernment to really figure out the layers of what's going on, right?
Yeah,
they're very much into a very cartoonish view of reality.
Yeah.
Example is, Trump, he's very polarizing. In fact, he likes to troll, right? He's like the master troll.
Yeah.
So Trump says hydrochloroquine is something you might want to try out. What's the automatic response from the so-called left? Right. It's poison, and the media was telling him it's poison, right? Interestingly enough, now that Trump seems to be just fading out, the hospitals are quietly reintroducing hydrochloroquine.
Yep.
So people died because of political games.
It's ridiculous. I mean, seriously, like this is a medication that's been around forever and ever and ever, and there's never been any controversy about it, right? And then, like that's the whole thing. Like if Trump had said that, like, like oxygen is good for you, people would have been like, let's oxygen, right? Like, that's the level of cartoonish nonsense that we've gotten to. Right,
it's Orange Man bad and TDS, the Trump derangement.
Oh my God! Which exists on both sides. Which exists on. I still see people in the alternative media on the right wing making all these excuses for Trump and how he's going to rush in at the last minute and save the day. I mean, it just
well, Emily, you're going to eat your words when JFK Jr. pops out at the last moment, right? So
I thought wasn't that supposed to happen on October 17th or something like that? You know,
they're still working on the time machine. They're going to bring him back, but
right? Yeah.
No, so Bolsonaro is to another level. I think he's an Aries, so Aries sun. So he's very aggressive. Right. He comes from a military background, is tied to the history of military dictatorship in Brazil. But you know, of course, the left is. You think the left here is crazy? It's very extreme in Latin America. It's that kind of like that kind of Che Guevara, like really that's the difference, right? Because there's socialism. And then there's communism where it's like arms struggle, that kind of stuff. Yeah. So Bolsonaro, he's saying like a lot of similar things as Trump. Like, I'm not going to really enforce mandatory vaccines. And now the Supreme Court in Brazil, they're pushing mandatory vaccine bill.
Yeah.
And so it's context also because Brazil, I think, has a lower education level than Mexico, even though as a country it's larger and has more quote unquote wealth and resources. So, and the class split is huge. It's basically a plantation society. If you want to, you know, one of the things that really informs me about what's happening here or in like the Western nations is when I see the kind of chaos and the kind of breakdown that's happening, I go, I know this. This is Brazil.
Yeah.
You know, they're basically the main thing is it's affecting the whole world, but they're really the power structure is very focused on collapsing the developed nations because we're the ones that actually have the most leeway and room to resist. But once you're pushed down to that first chakra survival mode, you can't do anything, right?
Yeah.
So so there's a huge class split, there's a huge education split, and there's a huge, I would say, cultural or worldview split, which is the polarization is worldwide. But in this case, in Brazil, you have a lot of that whole Catholic history. But I would say it's probably 50-50 now with as far as the Christians, with the evangelicals, maybe even more, right? So there you have your sort of like neoliberal upper class. I don't think they have a middle class. And they think this whole Christian thing is ridiculous. And that's Bolsonaro's base, right?
Yeah.
So they're saying it's kind of like here, right? Like science. We believe in science, and science works except when it's corrupted.
Right.
So this is what a lot of people in the so-called the neoliberal elites do not get. They think, oh, we're so smart. We believe in science, not your sky god Christianity, right? So I would say 99.9% of these neoliberal elites are going to take the vaccine.
Yeah.
And it's a funny thing that I think the resistance is actually going to come from the Christians, which I don't necessarily agree 100% with their evangelical view.
Yeah.
But isn't that strange, Emily, that it's going to be probably some of the Christians that are not going to have this hydrogel and nanobots running in their blood or something.
No, I mean, yeah, it is interesting. It is definitely interesting. A couple questions. Are the people there like in general buying it hook, line, and sinker the way they are here? Are the people wearing masks? Or is everything closed? Or is it not like that there?
There's a great fear because I think there's not as many people that really, if you really want to know what's going on, you have to look at the alternative media, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there's probably not as many people that are looking deeply into it.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
And then, because, the media there is just pumping out death. We really don't know what the case is because it's so politicized. It's just like, look what happened to our election, right?
Yeah.
And you have 20 years of the PT, it's basically the center left party.
Yeah.
The deposed president Dilma Rousseff and Lula, they were from the left party. They were in power for 20 years. And like so many positions throughout society, civil service, they're all these left PT people. So you don't think they're going to bend the figures a little bit to make sure Bolsonaro gets out. So we really don't know what's going on. It's the same as here.
Same thing as here.
Yeah, it's the same thing as here.
So,
The now they just started locking down again.
okay.
Because to this point they had a period where a lot of the restaurants were closed, and then they didn't do that again. But I hear it's happening again.
Yeah.
But when I was there for the
Yeah.
past like 2 weeks, they weren't really, people were wearing masks, and you had the same thing as here, right? You can go in, but then when you take the mask off, a lot of places the tables were not distanced,
Right.
and there was no real enforcement because
Yeah.
Bolsinaro was saying, I'm not going to really enforce any of these rules, right? But guess who was doing the distancing, Emily?
Who?
The Japanese.
Well, that's not surprising.
If it was me and there's no enforcement, I would do the mask thing just to make people feel safe, but I would not do this distancing the tables, because if no other restaurants are doing it, the Italians aren't doing it, the Arabs aren't doing it. From what I saw, the Japanese were doing it.
Yeah.
You're just putting yourself out of business.
Yeah.
If there's no enforcement, like, why are you gonna do
Yeah.
it, right?
Okay.
The Japanese like the rules. Let me tell you a story though about, because I was saying some mystical things happen. So I saw a number of people, it was a handful, but these are all people that I've known for a while, that in this environment, they are coming from nothing and manifesting something. So one of them was Junior Dread, who's a well-known reggae singer, Brazilian reggae singer in Brazil. Artist, right? Shows, no shows. All the clubs are closed. The restaurants are open down there. Can't really travel, can't tour. He got kids and an ex-wife. What are you gonna do? The income stream went to like zero, right?
Yeah.
No, he's kind of like us. He has a sense of being tapped in and have a read of things. He said, I'm gonna manifest this. So he has toured before, and I think one of his music videos last year, it has over 100,000 views. So he's not like well known to the average public, but he's been out there. He started doing what they call dub plate or specials, like singing a tune for, say, a sound in Germany. And he says their name. It's a dub plate special. He's getting paid for it, and that's a special they can play in their mixes or whenever the shows open up again.
Yeah.
He went from literally zero to he's probably doing better than in some of the times that when things were open.
Right.
And we were talking about energy and these kind of things, and he's born on 9/11, Emily. So he's very psychic. That's like the Jesus day,
Yeah.
And he was talking about, it's not really about him, but he has a capability to channel these energies. And literally from the numerology, I know that's true. He was talking about the positive energy and then channeling it to the people like this, right?
Yeah.
And he's at a place now where he's had a lot of life experiences. He has had kids. He had a major relationship. Has an ex-wife, right? But now he's in his career, still doing the reggae thing. But it's like, I think a lot of people are feeling this compulsion or this flow that many of us are about to go to a whole nother level.
Yeah.
And I saw that several times among my friends in Brazil. And right before I was going to come back, typical thing in Brazil is the barbecue. Some very good barbecue, Emily. So we're at my friend's house. Oh, it's my friend. She's like married now. So they just moved into a new house. We're by the little pit. Every good Brazilian house, they got a little barbecue pit, right?
Yeah.
And we're eating stuff like that. And one of the friends, I had no idea this was going to happen, but we started talking, and this guy, we're talking about this number 11, right? I said, oh, let me look at your numbers. He had 3 11s in his chart. You're talking about psychic.
Right.
I'm like, oh, I said, man, no wonder. And we just started talking, and I said, look, man, I'm going to go get something. So I went and I got him a pendant. It was the simple one, single loop tensor pendant, right? I said, yeah, that one. And I said, you should really protect your energy, because a lot of the people that are very psychic, they're very open to all signals, including the Wi-Fi, whatever. Emily, this is, he's probably in his early 20s, but he got very quiet, and tears started coming down his face. I'm getting kind of emotional.
Yeah.
And his mother had thought about putting him in a psychiatric hospital. The the Brazil vibes got me. But you understand, it's like this guy had never been able to talk to somebody.
Yeah.
So sometimes we just need somebody to tell us it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
So
I think a lot of us from this community who like are aware of all these things, we've had, you know, like I know Robert's talked about some of his close calls with the psychiatric system, right? I certainly walked a line at a period of time in my life where it was like, right? Like I think, you know, that's been a possibility for a lot of us. And it was because we were seeing back at an earlier time what is becoming obvious now. And so it looked crazy then, but we're actually best equipped to handle the reality of now. And you know, like that's awesome that you were kind of there to sort of like, you know, almost
like, I gave the guy a hug and I kind of played it off, but I looked at the husband of the house and I said, this is some real Brazil shit right now. He goes, churras y macumba, mano. This is like the barbecue and the voodoo. but
different kind of spirit cooking.
Yeah, and you know, so this is what I was saying though, right? Different regions. I think people would be very shaken up if this happened here in LA. Like to be openly crying like that. The guy's talking about spirits, he's seeing stuff. It was interesting because again, I was saying that, well, people in general, a lot of them, they haven't looked as deeply in the quote unquote research as we've done. But I was talking to him about what's happening, and I was saying that there's definitely a splitting in society. I think these shots are nothing good. And I was telling him that you know, the AI is basically, it may be an antichrist consciousness. This is what the traditions was talking about, right? You're going to have the organic mind of the group, and you're going to have a kind of a artificial construct, because the Aquarian age, everybody's going to want to have this connection with the one mind. But if you're just going along to get along, and it doesn't mean they're bad people, but they were like born that way, right, Emily? So God made them that way, so somebody got to play the hive mind Borg role. So there's going to be a lot of people to do that. He said, he goes, I understand what you're talking about. I couldn't put it in words, but I see what you're saying. So that was that was like basically the conclusion of my trip. And I've had many experiences like that, you know. So the good part is definitely we are on the precipice of a whole new phase, you know. So that's a good, I really feel that, although I don't think we've even seen the darkest days as far as like what you're going to see on the street in society, at the same time, I think a lot of us will be fine if you've done your self work, if you see what's happening and you kind of like know, okay, I just got to be a little smart. There's always a way, Emily. There's always a way.
Yeah.
And I think universe will see. Universe has to allow the more darker aspect of this hive mind stuff, which is, to me, it's kind of boring. Because Aquarius is what? Aquarius is novelty, even to, that's fucking weird. But guess what? Aquarius loves that. So it has to allow some of these real weirdos to exist along with this hive mind. So I think we'll be fine. And I'll say this also. One thing that because there's a lot of vaxxers in Brazil also, I was saying these.
Yeah. Oh, you just got frozen. Hold on. That's weird.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that was a glitch, right?
Yeah. As soon as
see that.
No.
Yeah. So a lot of the overeducated people are actually the ones that are not going to make it to 2030 as full organic humans. It's the fear. I see this across the board. It's fear. And this is what is compelling people to go along with the quote unquote program, because they they are not confident in themselves to be independent, and they're hugging on the leg of big daddy government,
Yeah.
of quote unquote must science.
Yeah.
Like their science is Bill Nye. That's what their science is. You know, it's a scientism. It's
Right.
the cult of science, which scientific method works, but not when it's corrupted and you're cherry picking the information to get what to
Yeah.
reconfirm your bias, right?
Yeah.
And this is what in the mythology has collapsed many societies and cycles previously. It was the scientists. It was these egghead priest class that were so in their heads and disconnected from the planet and the people that it just skewed and put things off balance, right? Talking about yin yang, right?
Yeah.
You always need the logic, the sacred masculine, but you balance it against the energy and the intuition. The
Yeah.
two halves make a whole. And these tech elites and these reptoid banker types, they're basically all about science. Man,
Yeah.
science to the extreme, it's a kind of pure materialism,
Yeah.
which leads to what? Artificial intelligence. That's what it leads to.
Yeah.
So,
So I think that sometime I would like to go check out Brazil with you, Masaki. So when you figure out,
Emily, there is some great food.
well, you figure out when Renato Cohen is going to be playing.
I have the context. I can connect. We could even have a private show.
Okay. Yeah. So if I'm going to go to Brazil, I want to like the full on Brazilian techno experience. We'll have the food, and I'm sure that I will find my way into some strange mystical layer that exists between the streets and the sounds. That will be really interesting.
I'll tell you the final note, and this goes back to kind of like we're all ready to take another big step forward. Is so I had the barbecue voodoo, right? You saw, I think you know me well enough, Emily. I'm not one to cry like that, but it was very emotional. So this family, my second family in the world is in Brazil. It's a Black Brazilian family, and has roots in Bahia, which if people know, the northeast of Brazil, it's in some ways it's like it could be like blacker than Africa. It's very African, that corner. So the family's in Sao Paulo, but they have some roots in Bahia. And the same family, they started a spiritual house with the channeling and all that. So this is what I'm seeing every time I'm going, right?
Yeah.
But I think a lot of times when you're dealing with stuff, it's like I don't know how you say, you're a little bit numb to everything, because I spent so many years just like working through stuff. So I've been in their house a million times, but they're going to start rolling out these COVID passes. So I don't know when I'm going to go back again, because I'm not taking the shot.
Yeah.
So I don't know when I could go back. Her parents are old, so I don't know if I'll see them again.
Yeah.
And I was sitting in, they have an aunt too. She lives at the house. I was sitting in the living room, just knowing this is, I was telling the aunt, I don't know if you know this, but I don't think I could be doing the business that I'm doing now, which is pretty successful now, unless I had lived with you guys and had all these experiences.
Yeah.
And then Emily, I'm okay. I'm not into the Santeria thing, and I'm not a Christian, but I've seen the inside of their house a million times. But I was just looking at the saints and white Jesus on the wall.
Yeah.
And it was just so overwhelming. That environment that had always been there. And then I started like the kind of like tearing again. she looked at me, and then in Portuguese, she goes, is this MF crying? She goes, ele está chorando. It's like, is he crying? But it was everything that everybody's experience is different, but a lot of us over this last 10 or 20 years, we've been through so much.
Yeah.
And that, I feel like we've completed a cycle. But that also means that there may be people that we may be leaving behind.
Yeah.
That we may have to physically move. There's a lot of people moving now, right?
Yeah.
So it was that kind of feeling. It was overwhelming.
Yeah.
But the good part is, I really see, for many of us, we're going to take another step 2021, it's gonna be crazy. But I think that we have it in us that we put in the work. We healed ourselves to a level where we can be operational, right? Because there was a lot of days, I think a lot of us were in bed like, oh man,
Yeah.
right? But this is the good side that as the world is going crazy, who are the real weirdos? It's us, and we are ready to rock it. That's the message.
We are ready to rock it. All right. Before we wrap up this first hour, I do want to hit back with, when we talked at the beginning of the year, you really talked about 2020 as being a building year, right? And I don't think any of us saw coming what came, right? Like, kind of as we look at 2020 now, sort of in hindsight, like, does what happened this year make sense? Or was this like does 2020 make sense according to the numerology, according to
I think so. If people go back, and I'm sure Emily will post the links, or I'll post the link in the description. We did a show on 2020. I did a free report so people can check that out. But I was basically saying that number one, it would be the first year of the reset. So I and many people, we knew that there was going to be a financial reset. I thought it was just going to be a financial collapse, but it was a cultural reset too. That's the thing that I think I didn't really fully understand, is that it was going to be so in our face. Because, for those of us that listen to like Patriot Radio, been in this area for years, they're all Federal Reserve and all that kind of stuff. And so that's more easy to wrap your mind around, like, oh, they're going to collapse the economy. Like, we understand that. But the whole mask thing and all this, that I think the virus to really kick it off, that's what I didn't see.
Right.
But everything else, I think the rest of my outlook was pretty on the dot. It's just it's one thing to intellectually know these things, but trust me, people, when I see it, or when it's happening in real time, you're like, wow. We're still hit at an emotional level. But I think the thing is that if you're watching Emily Moyer and you're into this area, you're much better prepared, because at least we have some kind of mental or philosophical framework to understand what's going on. So the average public, they have totally no idea what's happening. They think we're still going to go to 2019. They think we can go back. That's not going to happen. And they see all these events as totally unconnected when it's all connected.
Yeah.
So it's like, if we're the nuts and we're the conspiracy theorists, right? How are we months and years ahead in understanding what's going on, right? So
do you think, like, so when we look at like this, 2020 is a pivotal year here, right? Like, I think the term Hindsight is 2020 is comes to mind, and the idea that like when we have perfect vision is 2020, right? Like, I think there's a lot sort of wrapped into that. What do you think was the most significant occurrence this year? Do you think it was this virus, or do you think it was something else? Do you think it was the Crane conjunction? Do you think it was the
I think
what do you
I think in general, everything's on the table now. The veil was ripped off, and we can see clearly who's who. And that, so you can see, and this is that concept of the splitting, right? Like in the biblical Christian scriptures, they call it the separation of the wheat and the chaff, right? So you can clearly see where the direction of people are. And it's funny because I think for many of us, we just look at it like, well, we've looked at enough quote unquote data points, facts, A plus B equals C. So on that basis, I'm not taking the shot, or I'm doing this or that, right? But I see with a lot of these vaxxers and the mask people, it's a cult, it's a religion, because the kind of like the violent religious fervor they have,
and the blind faith.
I mean, like okay, let's just say the vaccine works. Why are they gritting their teeth and saying take the shots? It's crazy, right?
Well, it's so interesting too, like how, I mean, it's absolute clown world when you, the media is being honest. Like, oh yeah, one side effect of the shot is that you might get HIV or you might die.
Might die. Well, Emily, I have a cousin that works at Kaiser.
Yeah.
She just got the shot and she had a bad reaction.
Yeah.
And I didn't know this, but I guess it's a 2-round shot, this Pfizer.
Yeah.
And she she's a normie, right? So she's having second thoughts about getting a second shot that she almost, like, I don't know. I don't think she was gonna die, but it was severe enough that they had to keep her in the hospital.
Yeah.
And then if this is the case, because all of us have been seeing these reports, right? If I'm hearing it from my own family, it has to be far greater than the 5%
Yes.
reaction. It's got to be like 20% or more.
Yeah.
Right? What does that tell you? These things are toxic, man.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So
it's all out there. This is not hidden secret information anymore. They're doing all of their corruption just right out there in the open, right? Like it isn't like the emperor's not wearing clothes. This is like the emperor doesn't even know what clothes are, right? Like that's how like naked everything is. And so everything is there. It's there for people to see and whatnot. And the fact that like people still maintain a faith, like you can show people things that undoubtedly, without any question at all, prove that their belief is not only like wrong, but like dead wrong. And they'll be like, well, just in case, I don't care. It's kind of like when people, you know, aren't religious by nature, but they had that sort of religious programming in their family. And so like, they don't really believe in heaven and hell, but they do they go to church on certain days, just in case kind of stuff, right?
Well, you know, it goes back to this fear thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's not even death. It's just a threat of death.
Yeah.
That because according to the official numbers, the recovery rate's like what, 99.6, 99.8.
Right.
So the death rate is like 0.2% or something, 0.4%.
The immune system is more effective than any of these vaccines, but people can't trust themselves, right? It's like, that's the real thing. Like when you see somebody driving around in their car by themselves with their mask on, that is the truth. People are afraid of themselves. They don't trust themselves. They don't know themselves. So there is a certain level of comfort in covering your face up, right? And outsourcing your autonomy and your ability to make decisions for yourself to the Borg. Because you know what I mean? Like there's just, you know, that's what the fear is of, right?
Well, you know, the thing is that I think a lot of us, I mean, we're just people, but we've been through a lot. And I think the more that you've been in this area of, you know, crossing the dimensions and being at least aware that there's something more than just a 3D here.
Yeah.
I don't want to die prematurely, but I can tell you, I'm not afraid of death because I know that there's more.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you don't know, like a lot of these people, they're not ready to live. Yeah. Because they're so afraid of death. Because they're basically pure materialists. This is the scientism, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things in the Buddhism, because my family has a long tradition running the Buddhist temples.
Yeah.
The Buddha and his disciples, one of the first things that they would do is they would go to a funeral, and you know, back then they would put a body on a pyre, the logs, and the monks, they would have to watch this person that passed away be incinerated, cremated, right? To understand this is going to be you someday. And again, this goes back to the whole like the yin yang, the masculine feminine thing, because the West is very Aries dominant, unyielding, like it's me, I have the right way, which, you know, it has its value because the West was able to push the culture, push the advancements technically, but I think they're kind of weak spiritually because Americans and Westerners in general cannot deal with death. It's you know, it used to be a very common tradition throughout the world. The family member dies in the home around the family members. Now, what do? We put them in the hospital. We don't even want to look.
Yeah, no,
we put them in the care home. We don't want to. We don't want to accept the circle of life. And if you can't accept life, you can't accept death, and vice versa.
It's true. Like, we just had this experience recently where, our cat died. My cat had been like,
Yep.
with me for 19 years. And, we decided that we weren't, going to put her down or anything like that. Unless she was in obvious, discomfort and pain, right? We were going to allow her to die at home here with us. And, it's scary for me. Like I find it more scary to sit next to something that's dying or watch something dying than I feel like I have fear of my own death. Laura is really good at it. Like Laura was amazing, right? And I would kind of phase in and out of being able to like really get close to Olivia, and then I'd kind of have to shy away a little bit and whatever. But it was, I was home alone with Olivia sitting right next to her when she passed, and it was, I think, a really important experience for me. It was scary. I was scared, and I would kind of back up from it and go back, but I made myself do it. I had to do it for the exact reason that you're talking about, right? Like I needed to overcome whatever this is, because it is part of a natural cycle, and it is, and like when we love someone, an animal, a person, whatever, like that's an important thing to be able to sit with them and usher them through that way, and not just send them somewhere else to do the undesirable thing. So yeah, absolutely.
Well, you know that one of the things that I've been thinking about the last few years is because I come from a temple background, right? But before that, my family are shamed samurai. They're military because we lost the war, so they had to like switch professions. Otherwise, would have had to suicide our whole line because of shame. But my mom's side, they had two kind of symbols for the family. One was for peacetime. It's like a logo called Mon, the family crest. But the war, we had a wartime Mon also. I don't know if you could see this, but I kind of, it's so bright. You see this?
Yeah.
Six coins. The Ryo, Y, it's a R-Y-O, Ryo. Ryo is a gold coin.
Okay.
So they would have this banner of these 6 coins when they're at war. Do you know what this means? The 6 coins is like you have to pay it's kind of like you're on the river Styx. You have to pay the boatman. In the Buddhism, there's 6 realms of hell. So with that, the significance is we're going to war. I'm ready to die. I'm ready to pay the underworld.
Yeah.
And I think it goes. It doesn't have to be that serious, but I think it goes back to the fact that for those of us that have seen the circle of life,
yeah,
we're not afraid. We don't want to die, but if that has to happen,
yeah, yep,
I'm not going out on my knees. And let me tell you, this is the most dangerous thing to the system. People that are not afraid of this, we're not going to give in.
Yeah.
So I feel like it won't even come to that for me and for many of us, because we've just we've worked through so much of our stuff that the only thing to hold us down now is ourselves. It's not other people, other forces. It's also that general idea that if you ramp your frequency up, and I'm surrounded by pyramids. I made like hundreds of pyramids at this point. I got the tensor rings. I got crystals all around me. I really don't think anything bad's going to happen. If something bad happens, it's because of my own ego and I trip myself up. But I think a lot of us have worked to the point now where it's like, okay, are you ready? Because 2021 is going to be the liftoff into a whole new thing, you know?
Yeah, no, I agree.
So,
it's about standing firm in ourselves with that sort of awareness. All right, we're going to wrap up this hour. We're going to move over into the patrons hour, patreon.com/offplanetmedia. We will do a forecast of what we see in 2021. But before we go, Masaki, tell people where they can find you and where they can get your super neat stuff.
My website is akaida.com. It's akaida.com. I'm on Patreon, Pyramid Power Patreon, YouTube, Akaida TV, and people can find me on Instagram, Masaki_1ONE.
Awesome. And Yeah, your pyramid, all your tools and stuff like that, they're there for now, but they may not be there forever. So
Oh, that's right. Well, because I think I think I had this feeling for a while, and it's been confirmed. I looked at the astrological trend. I'm probably going to be moving or some big change by the end of next year. So if you want a pyramid, if you want certain things, I'll be operating as normal for most of this coming year, but prices will be going up and availability will become less. So get it while you can, folks.
get it while you can. They're really cool. All right, guys, we'll see you on the other side. Bye bye.